Warframe is honestly unlike any other game I've ever played. It's incredibly fast-paced, has electric and exciting combat, has an incredibly large arsenal of weapons and abilities. I mean, the combinations are endless, and the excitement they bring are equally as endless. Not to mention it's set in a galaxy filled to the brim with all sorts of different missions, locations, and honestly, incredibly interesting lore. On top of all that, the game looks great graphically and runs like a charm if you have like the recommended specs. It's honestly one of my favorite games of all time, and the fact that you get to experience and explore its incredibly complex and interesting universe completely for free is amazing. Between playing Warframe on my Xbox, Nintendo Switch, somehow, and computer, I've probably put well over 1,000 hours into the game. And I don't regret a single moment of that time. I mean, I could have got a hobby, I could have learned to play a guitar or something, but I mean, come on, Warframe's pretty great. I wouldn't really describe Warframe as an MMO, but playing with others cooperatively online is an important part of the experience. The game promotes community building with clans, and the fact that a large amount of items and weapons are locked behind being in a clan does show that. However, you can be a social recluse, honestly, and play this game still. Even if you never interact with another player throughout your entire Warframe journey, it still has an incredibly interesting story with absolutely amazing lore that would make a solo playthrough just for the story absolutely worth it. Now, I've really been slobbering on Warframe's knob just a little bit throughout this intro. I think it's time to get to the actual point of this video, the grinding aspect of Warframe. By far, one of the biggest and most vocal complaints I've seen thrown at Warframe from its detractors is that Warframe is incredibly grindy, and the only way not to waste a ton of your time is to pay for items with real-world money. Basically, the argument is that the game forces you to replay missions a ton due to the luck factor when it comes to receiving parts and items. The only way not to waste countless hours of your time to get these items is to just directly pay for them. While I absolutely do not completely agree with this statement, there is some truth in it. A shining example of the Warframe grind getting ridiculous from my own personal experiences is when I was attempting to gather parts for the Warframe Atlas Prime on my Nintendo Switch. I remember spending hours just to stock up on the relics that I would need to get the Atlas parts, and then spending a nearly equal amount of time going through all of them in order to get the parts needed. I remember in particular an interception mission that I probably replayed around 15 times just because I was getting so extremely unlucky. It doesn't help that I'm already not the biggest fan of interception missions, so this was a pretty bad experience. Overall, I believe it took me around 10 hours of gameplay in order to get all the relics I needed and to have the luck I needed when breaking them open in order to get all the parts for Prime Atlas. 10 hours of replaying the same missions over and over again for a single Warframe is the definition of grind, and that grind is artificially inflated in order to influence players to spend real world money to instantly get Atlas with Prime access, or to buy Platinum to get him on the player driven market. The point of this story is to show that these claims of Warframe being too grindy and a scheme to take your money has a certain amount of truth in it. However, when you take a closer look at the situation, saying that the grinding hurts the game just doesn't really make a ton of sense to me. Believe it or not, the amount of grinding that needs to be done in order to enjoy Warframe is actually not that much. You can essentially complete the entire main story of the game, including the majority of the side missions, without ever needing to grind for gear. If you get the right mods, which you will get just from random drops, you can pretty much take your beginner weapons to the mid and late game without issues. And by beginner weapons, I mean the ones you literally start the game off with for free. They just give them to you. Not to mention, throughout the story, you will naturally get and receive new weapons and frames. A weapon that immediately comes to mind for me, and I still even use on the Steel Path, is the Broken War. Just by playing through the story, you'll pretty much get everything you need to get all the way to the end game of Warframe. The fact that you really don't have to grind at all in order to catch up to the main story of the game really just shows that there really isn't a grinding issue in Warframe. You can experience nearly everything the universe and story has to offer without spending countless hours on the same mission trying to get better equipment. This section of the video isn't to claim that there is no grinding in Warframe, but to instead say that the majority of Warframe can be experienced without grinding. I would argue that almost all grinding in Warframe is completely optional, and you really only ever have to do it if you want a specific item or Warframe. The only scenario where I would say grinding might be required at the earlier levels, is grinding for Indo to prove your mods. And that's because when you're starting out, there's not a ton of different options to earn Indo quickly. But besides for that, I can't really think of a single time that I was forced to grind while playing through the main story missions of Warframe. You can pretty much jump from one mission to another until you're completely caught up without having to take a break to grind. Now what I want to talk about is the actual grinding that takes place in Warframe, and how for the most part it is completely optional. As I said earlier in the second section of my transcript, it took me an unfathomable amount of time grinding to achieve all the parts that I needed to create that Atlas Prime Warframe. And the reason I spent 10 hours grinding to achieve this new frame is because I literally just thought he'd look cool. I didn't need a new, stronger Prime frame to complete a certain mission. I didn't need one of his abilities to make my time easier. I literally just grinded for him because I thought he was neat. I mean, Atlas is a flippin' awesome name. And this is a reflection of pretty much all of the grind that takes place in the entire game of Warframe. Base Rhino, which you would get all the parts for in less than 30 minutes easily, is a good enough frame when modded properly to easily complete every single quest in the game and even be completely viable in Steel Path or other late game missions that are just hard to be hard. So when someone does choose to grind relentlessly to get a certain frame or item, it's just out of want. The game doesn't force you to grind, and it doesn't even force you to grind to do cool things. Prime weapons and armor, or frames, which are typically the items that require the most grinding, when I immediately think about it, aren't even that much better than their base versions. They are better, but not that much better, and are absolutely not even close to required in order to experience everything that Warframe has to offer. Really, the only people I know that grind in Warframe are those who have experienced the story and the universe to their complete extent and are now choosing to grind for certain items, weapons, or frames just to try them out. Another common criticism I see about Warframe is that the missions are far too repetitive. For example, people say that you just replay missions in a new setting with the same goal over and over again, since there is usually at least one type of mission on every new planet. This criticism can be seen as, I guess, somewhat valid, because every single planet does generally have at least one capture, one extermination, and so on it, right? However, I would argue that this criticism is in complete bad faith. This logic of thinking that you just continually do the same missions over and over isn't taking everything into account, or honestly, anything into account. First of all, a capture mission on somewhere like Venus is a completely different experience than one on Earth. The environments are drastically different, the enemies are from completely different factions, and there's also a significant difference in the difficulty scaling. And this is typical for every capture mission. There are 4 different factions of enemies that can be involved in the mission, there are different difficulty levels for every single capture mission, and most have completely different environments. So to argue that you just do the same mission over and over is just in complete bad faith. Not to mention, there are 21 different types of basic missions in Warframe, and around 263 mission nodes with basic missions on them in Warframe. Obviously, there is an equal amount of every type of mission, but if we assume that there are similar amounts, that would mean there are only about 15 missions of the same type in the entire game. When you take into account that most missions only really take 5 to 15 minutes, if you're focused completely on the objective, that's not really a lot of time spent in a single mission type. Maybe 3 hours at most, if you do all of them back to back to back, which you obviously won't be doing. So I find this repetition argument incredibly weak, and this is honestly insane. It's an insane take based on how diverse Warframe truly is when it comes to the enemy scene and the different settings and the different difficulty scalings, and I'm getting worked up just thinking about it. Not to mention, this complaint is only valid for the basic node missions. It doesn't even involve the actual story important missions, which are generally incredibly unique from one another, and honestly, they're cinematic masterpieces a lot of the time, like the New War. Oh my gosh, don't make me rant about that. That's an amazing mission. I love it so much. Maybe my favorite mission of any game ever. Okay, I'm sorry, we're getting off script here. I'm getting irritated and I'm getting fanboy. My bad. This is overall is a much weaker point I see detractors bring up than the game being too grindy was, which was also a bad point in my opinion. There's not a lot of good points in this video, I'll be honest with you. We're killing them today. Now that I fought back against the forced grinding allegations and the game being too repetitive allegations, I want to talk about why most veteran players actually enjoy grinding for different items in Warframe. This comes from my own experiences playing the game and the general thought process of a lot of my friends who are also pretty deep into the, the Warframe addiction. One of the most important things that Warframe has that can make even playing the same mission over and over again interesting is a seemingly limitless amount of different arsenal combinations that you can use. Now I'm about to freak out, fanboy out here, because this is incredible. There are 9 different types of primary weapon types. I don't mean 9 different guns. I mean 9 different categories of primary weapons that are functionally different. There are 8 different types of secondary weapons, and finally a whopping 28 functionally different types of melee weapons. This is an absolutely insane amount of variety to have in a single game, and allow for an insane amount of new experiences just trying out different types of weapons. Experimenting with new weapon types turns grinding into something fun and exciting, not to mention how insanely smooth and high quality the gameplay is in Warframe. Honestly, even without all the different weapons and frames, I could play this game forever. It has some of the best combat ever in my opinion, and I encourage literally everyone to try out the game. Another thing that Warframe does to make grinding more interesting is randomized maps. Most basic maps have random map layouts, so while we're playing a mission, the layout won't constantly be the same. Most people don't think about the randomized areas too much because they all largely look the same, to be honest. However, I think just having a slightly different layout so you can expect something different every time really improves the experience. I don't think that part of the game gets enough credit, especially with how fluid and amazing most maps feel and look while traversing. That's a hard word. I'm sorry, traversing. I'm sorry. I'm moving on. I have been riding Warframe this entire video. I mean, really slobbering all over Digital Extremes. Like, I honestly can't believe I wrote this down. But the next line is saying I was next level throating of Digital Extremes. I don't want. Moving on. I want to make it clear that I do have issues with the game, and you can check out my thoughts around things I don't like in my Warframe playlist. Ultimately, though, Warframe is one of my favorite games of all time. I honestly feel like it has legendary combat that almost every gamer should try at least once. So that's why I made this video, because I want to shut down the most common complaints about Warframe that I honestly feel like they don't really make a lot of sense. These complaints are particularly important because they make it less likely for new players to try out the game. I honestly find that extremely disappointing. The story is great, the graphics look amazing, the combat is some of the best combat I've ever played, and the loadout combinations are next level. So basically the conclusion of this video is that you should try out Warframe. Huge shout out to both of my channel members, Mr. Special Head and Miss Katie, and thank you, the viewer, for making it to the end of this video. Like, subscribe, and comment, become a member, all that amazing stuff. But really, I just appreciate you guys watching this whole video. That's the most important thing you could have done, because guess what? It makes me money. Let's go, baby. Mr. Krabs PNG, baby. Put up Mr. Krabs PNG. Let's go, baby. Mr. Krabs PNG. Alright, but peace out, guys. Have a good one. Let me know what you guys want me to talk about next. And I like Warframe.